This week on the grid, we have a poutine-loving episode where we'll be joined by the Canadian boss himself, the original Photoshop guy, Dave Cross. He's in the house, and we're going to be talking about all things Photoshop, answering your questions about anything you have except for 3D, and getting into selections and masking. And it all starts in 57 seconds.
The Grid is brought to you by Tamron. Check out their 28 to 75 millimeter f2.8 lens. It's for Sony full-frame mirrorless. It's awesome. Go to tamron-usa.com.
And ProPhoto, the light shaping company. Check out the ProPhoto B1X. Power in all the right places. Go to prophoto.com/US.
And Platyball, the tripod alternative that is changing the world. Everybody has a Platyball. You should too. Go to platyball.com.
Well, hey, Grid Nation, we are here, and we're joined by Dave Cross. And look, I'm the one wearing the red today, right?
What's wrong with that picture?
Usually this is reversed, where you're wearing the red.
That's true.
Yeah, so Dave Vieira, thanks for joining us. You're here filming a class
pleasure.
for Kelby 1, right?
Right, yeah. I was just wrapped up actually filming class on selections and masks in Photoshop.
Ooh, yeah. Selections and masks. I mean, that's, we talk about, like last week we were talking about the Photoshop thing, and, really when you start unlocking the power of like selections and masking and that kind of stuff in Photoshop, that's where like it just can change your photography.
Oh,
right?
no question. And I've said for as long as I can remember that when people ask, like, if I've got 10 minutes to try and improve upon a skill, what should I work on? And without even thinking, I say selections, masks, layers. Those are like the three things that everything else revolves around that. So if you get better at those skills, then everything else gets easier.
Yep, that's the truth. So yeah, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first up here, we're going to do some selections, masking for people, kind of show them some stuff. But what we want to do is hear from you guys. So if you guys have any questions about Photoshop, like I said in the intro, the only thing is we had the caveat of nothing 3D.
Yeah.
We don't know 3D. Yeah. We can't help you with 3D.
Corey Barker's not here.
Pretty much everything else we can help you with. I could even probably help you if you wanted to do video in Photoshop. I got some tricks and tips and tricks there. But anything you have for Dave, just ask it in the comments. We even had some people already commenting pictures, like showing us picture examples. If you got examples of what you're talking about, we're going to go over that. Like, for example, here we got somebody on Twitter that commented about their selections of tree branches, so we're going to get into stuff like that. We also had one of our members commenting about overexposed highlights, so we're going to do that. So any comments you have, just throw them in the chat, show them to us, and we'll try to answer it the best of our ability. So just start asking away, asking any questions.
There is one other
caveat.
In addition to 3D, no questions to start with. How come Adobe ... Because we don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Anything that's, why does Adobe do this, or what? I don't know. I have no idea. So you can't ask those questions.
But you know what? We're missing somebody. So Scott is out. Scott's over at a seminar right now. So he's at his seminar in San Diego. So on the other coast. Right now he's teaching right now. So he's teaching in front of a sold out crowd over there. And he'll be in Phoenix tomorrow. So if you're in Phoenix, want to go by, there's still a few tickets left. So there you go. You can go to the Sheraton Phoenix tomorrow and see him. And then next month he's coming to Houston and Los Angeles. So go get your tickets now because they sell out. So definitely want to get it while it's hot. So anyways, the other thing we got, just getting the business out of the way, we got some giveaways. So Dave's giving us some T-shirts to give away. So we've got these T-shirts. What is this T-shirt?
So flatten is Photoshop's F word.
There you go. Flatten is Photoshop's F word. So you can win one of these T-shirts.
And you get a bonus pin from my podcast.
Little bonus pin, and your podcast is Talkin' Shop.
Talkin' Shop podcast.
Yep. So, and then we're going to be also giving away a Platyball Ultra,
Platyball.
Which is awesome.
Nice.
This is a great thing. This is obviously I don't even know why I explain it anymore, but it's basically it's a tripod alternative. It's something where you can put your camera on a base, either on a table, down low, up high, strap it to a tree, whatever you want to do with it. And they actually just came out with, a couple weeks ago on the show, launched a new Kickstarter for their Platyball, which is their ball head.
Yeah,
and I don't even know what they're up to. Maybe Jason can bring it up in the control room, but there we are, Platyball. They got 32 days to go, and they're already up to $359,000 committed to their Kickstarter.
Seems
and
like people like it.
Yeah, they were looking for. Remember they're coming on. They were looking for all 18,000. So definitely interest in the product.
Nice.
And it's an awesome. I mean, it's an awesome product. Awesome. I was dealing with shooting this weekend. And shooting stuff where I was wanting to pan on a certain horizon. I was like, oh, if I just had that Platyball, this would not be happening to me because I was doing a streak of a rocket over a lifeguard stand, and I was trying to line it up. And I was like, oh, man, if I had one of those Platyballs, this wouldn't have happened to me. So we're also be giving away, oh, yeah, Jason's bringing up, there's the shot right there we were doing this weekend. So we're giving away this Photoshop for Lightroom users as well from a guy named Scott Kelby. So if you want to win this stuff, just go into the comments, leave a comment, tell us what you want to win. We're going to be picking those at the end of the show. So just comment about that, or just comment in general. We got people joining us from all over the world. We got Kathy joining us from New Zealand. We got Becky saying that she's going to be joining Scott in Phoenix. We got Kathy from Colorado. So we got people joining all over the world. Ask your Photoshop questions, but before we get to the Photoshop questions, Dave, I wanted to show the viewers like something that from your class, some cool tip and trick from your selections and masking, kind of just to kind of preview the class.
Okay, I can do that.
All right, let's do it.
So what I want to show you is something that a lot of things I like to show are based, of course, on questions that come in, and people often deal about how do I deal with hair. And how do I mask someone? And one of the first tips I have is I used to look at a subject and I would spend all my time masking them and then drag them onto the new background and realized half of the time I was doing work that was unnecessary because in the context of the background it didn't really make sense. So the first suggestion is anytime you're going to do any kind of compositing, step one should always be drag your subject onto the new background, because then anything you do is going to be in the context of that new background. So now you're making more educated decisions when it comes to things like, do I need to really worry about every little hair? The second thing is, people who try to use select and mask always find that as much as we might be led to believe otherwise, it's hard to do it all in one shot. In other words, trying to keep the hard edges of body parts and also the flyaway hair is difficult. So one of the things that I found works like a charm is I just make 2 copies of my subject and I hide one of them, and on one of them I'm just going to worry about her body. And one of the other things I talked about a lot in my class was select subject, because this is just so useful. I mean, it's shaved a huge amount of time, because in Photoshop 2020 it's even better than it was in CC 2019.
And when did that come into Photoshop?
CC 2019 was the first version, and it was good, but they really did make a difference.
That is like, I don't have select subject. It's because
this
you're
is
probably
why.
on an older version.
So what I'm going to do here is I've just removed from the selection. So for this layer, all I care about is her body. So I look at it and I say, you know what, I don't really need to adjust anything, because we're going to pretend that little part is there. I did select it, but we're trying to do it quickly here. And then all I do is just say I want to make this into a layer mask, and click OK. Now, what we're seeing here, of course, is just the layer with her body. So it's going to, in a minute, you'll see it looks a little different. So I'm going to take the quick selection tool and now just make a rough selection of her hair and go back to select and mask. Now, it looks like I'm working on everything, but remember, her body's on a separate layer. So whatever I do with any slider is only going to affect this layer. So the challenge has always been, where do I move this slider to get the hair looking good, but not affecting the body? Well, now I don't have to worry, because the only thing on this layer effectively is her hair. So I can push these boundaries a lot more than I would have in the past, because I know I don't have to worry about losing detail on the edges. So then we can go in and pull out a bit more hair. Oops, wrong tool. Sorry. Pull out some more hair detail here and there, because I don't have to worry again about doing anything bad to the rest of her body. And again, I just need to make sure it's. I wish if you chose layer mask the first time, you would think it would just remember that, but no. So now all it means is I just have to remember. Of course, I have 2 layers to be able to show what she looks like. we're having a screen redraw thing here with my old computer. There we go. So if I want to move her, I have to just make sure both these layers are selected so I can reposition her. I might even put those into a group or even a smart object so that I don't have to worry about remembering that there are two different layers. But I found, as a way of really getting the best results out of select and mask, why not make its job easier by really defining the focus of, on one case we're just worrying about hard edges, in the other case we're worrying about things like hair, and then the composite effect is it looks like you've got the best of both worlds, which you really have. And like I said, you just have to remember that at some point you have separate layers when it comes to moving them around.
And that's what's so awesome, I think, about Photoshop is that it's that deep where you can kind of solve your own problems. Like that's really what you're doing there is you're solving your own problem. Of, look, I have such a hard time with the hair, but then when I focus on the hair, I'm doing damage to the body. So
and I hear that so often that I was just like, well, there's no magic number to say, well, if you click Smart Radius and move it to exactly 7, I mean, there isn't one. So this way, and this is a thing I focus on in my classes all the time, where it's kind of like, I call it like, think like Photoshop. Once you know what Photoshop is capable of, you can take kind of roundabout ways to do things. Can I show you another one?
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, and I think that's awesome. That's really cool. That like that's what I love about Photoshop is really kind of like digging in and solving your own problems as well. So here's where you can go as advanced as you want or as basic as you want.
And again, if you kind of see what kind of things are possible, I had a question a few years ago from someone who said, I've been really struggling to select fire because fire on a black background. I was like, really? Oh, I find it pretty easy. And they were like, what? Because I don't actually worry about selecting it. So all I do is bring it over, which our fire's a little on the big side here, but we'll kind of going to make it look like his shoulder's on fire, perhaps. So zoom in a little closer. So the hardest part for this one is actually just sort of finding the right size, but that's not a big deal. We'll do that pretty quickly. So instead of saying, well, now how do I select it? You don't even make a selection. You just double-click, go to the layer styles where we have these wonderful things called blend if sliders. Oops, wrong layer. And then just remove the black. And if you want to, you hold down the Option or Alt key to make a little sort of a softer edge. And just like that, we've got pretty nice looking flames without worrying about should I use the magic wand or the whatever, because you don't need to.
Right.
And that's again a case of knowing,
the concept of blending. Right. Instead of just using a mask or using a selection, and that's another thing that's so cool with Photoshop is you have these 10 different ways to do the same thing.
Well, and so it's kind of funny because in the class I just recorded all about selections and mask, I did one lesson where I said, this is going to sound really weird, but here's methods where you don't need to make a selection. So in a class on making selections, I was showing methods like this on, but the reason was because I knew some people would struggle and go, I don't get it, I'm using the magic wand, I'm trying this, and I had, I think, 2 or 3 different methods or techniques that didn't actually even involve making a selection, because in those particular instances, you didn't need to. So to me, that's part of knowing how to make a selection, is also knowing that there are cases where there might be a better alternative.
And what are those cases? Usually, what I see, when you have a solid background behind. So if it's like a black, like in that case, or white, or that's why in the movies they used a lot of gray or green, or green or blue. Was for that.
So there are things like that, and there are things like just knowing that there are, even in things like the fill command, there are blend modes that can adjust the way a fill color works. So sometimes looking at the color you have and the color you're trying to replace, you can just do it by picking the right blending as opposed to, again, worrying about selections.
Sweet. Well, awesome. There you go. So, so if you guys have any questions about that, any questions for us about Photoshop, just jump in the chat. We're going to take a quick break here in a sec. And when we come back, we have those couple, we have the image from the community. We also have the comment from online. But if you guys have any comments as well, any questions, just ask away in the chat, anything to do with Photoshop. We'll be answering your Photoshop questions. See you guys in just a couple minutes, unless it's 3D. Then you're...
Is the tripod dead? Sure, a tripod works for basic shots, but who wants to be basic? You don't need basic, you need blockbuster. And that's a job for a Platyball. The Platyball is your go-anywhere, do-anything flat tripod base. Its compact design helps you discover unique angles that you could never reach with a typical tripod. So, whether you're bringing up baby, driving Miss Daisy, or with your beasts of the southern wild, you can capture big budget footage and stills for a fraction of the time and money. So go ahead, shoot the next Rocky or Birdman. Or on the waterfront, the Platyball is equipped to grip uneven surfaces and hang from just about anything. When tripods go low, the Platyball goes lower. Its flat base reaches the lowest possible angle, resulting in truly inventive shots that can't be replicated with traditional equipment. And if you feel like adding a dramatic overhead angle, the Platyball has you covered. Just strap it or screw it in, and you're ready to go within minutes. The Platyball is constructed from aircraft-grade aluminum and titanium. Yeah, the stuff Air Force One is made of. So it's durable enough to travel with you from Chinatown to Casablanca and everywhere in between. If you only take the tripod, the story ends. You wake up the next morning with nothing but basic footage. Or you could take the Platyball to a museum, or on an elevator, or strap it to a tree, or hanging on a bench at church, or put it on the ground and get incredible blockbuster footage. Who are we kidding? You should totally take the Platyball. The tripod is not dead, but it needs a sidekick. The Platyball.
This segment of The Grid is brought to you by B&H Photo, the professional source since 1973.
All right, we are back, and we're talking Photoshop with Dave Cross. And Dave just showed us some awesome tips on selections, masking, blending, that kind of stuff. We got some questions coming in, but one of the first questions here was an image that was submitted in the community. It was actually Fernando in the community submitted an image and said, hey, you know, I've got this picture, I really like it, but I've got these blown out highlights on the arm. So this was obviously an image where you can see she was lit by a stage light, and that's usually what happens. You get these highlights, you get this stuff like that, and if you're not underexposed enough, it starts blowing out.
Sure.
So how would you deal with that situation?
Well, first of all, I would say, I mean, when we looked at this, our first, I think we both had the same reaction, is it's not actually that bad. I mean,
no,
when I heard the description,
photo.
I actually thought it was going to be much more evident, but it's just in the context of the whole photo, I kind of liked it. So what I would suggest is that there's a couple of options, but first of all, of course, when something is blown out, it means ultimately there's no information there. So to try and apply anything to the existing arms is going to be challenging because there's really nothing there to work with. So in a sort of an effort to try, I mean, I would still frankly probably go to like the camera raw filter and see if, you know, pulling down the highlights is going to pull anything back or not. So I mean, be more specific about that. If I'm going to do the camera raw filter, I would convert it to a smart object. So then when I go to the camera raw filter, this allows me to really overdo it. So kind of go to the point where it's, you know, going to go like, I don't think that's good. And then it has this little mask, so we fill the mask with black so there's nothing there. And then I can take my quick selection tool and make a selection. I won't do everything, but just to give you the idea. And on here, fill with white, and of course, initially it just looks way too much over the top, but part of my sort of philosophy is to look, so at least now I can see what I'm working with. So now that I've done that, I can go back and say, well, that was probably a little much. Let me pull these back a bit and see if that's a little better. And it's still going to be a subtle difference, but the problem is it's also going to be noisy because we're trying to pull so much back. So maybe even going in here and trying to do some noise reduction on top of that possibly could help at least make it a little smoother. So that would be kind of try one. The other one is to be even more manual about it and literally, this is going to seem really strange, but this is my approach in Photoshop, is to go, well, that didn't work, what about this? So try something like a solid color adjustment layer and pick a color and then try a blend mode, lower the opacity down, and again, the goal here is to get a little something there. So now we could try some filter or something to at least there's a little more information there that you're trying to deal with. None of them are going to be great, frankly, because again, when it's overexposed to that extent, there's just not a lot to deal with. So, you know, you can try things, but, you know, and I ultimately, again, I look at it and say, to me, it's, you know, it's not as over, sometimes people say blown out. I imagine it's just so distracting that I can't handle it. And this one is, it's not bad.
It's okay in the sense too, when you get down to it, this was intentionally, you can tell it was lit. Now, I mean, that's when, again, when shooting, I think that's where you could really take advantage of, you know, underexposing it, you know, when you're shooting. Like if you know you're going to be in those situations, intentionally underexposing. But that doesn't always work. Yeah. So, and I think, again, with me, it would be more embracing it, you know, that, maybe even turning it to black and white. That's what I was just about to experiment with on mine. I was just kind of getting it ready to, you know, because basically I was trying to kind of take it and kind of clean it up, bring out some of that red in her hair there. So just kind of bringing it back to that, kind of defocusing the background, and then maybe converting it to black and white and doing something with that where we go in here and we add we're basically going to go and not do that, but add a black and white adjustment.
That actually worked pretty well. Good idea, because on top of what I just did with adding the color, it actually
we could just go in here, kind of tune the black and white. And then it's kind of like I embraced her arms being blown out, right? And then I got a black and white image, you know? And that really, I don't know, I mean, compared to where we were in just a few minutes, you know, you could just come up to that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a cool shot.
Yeah, it is.
And that's where, again, you know, in those times you just have to attack it. And it's cool just to see, like, different people attacking it a different way. I went immediately to, let's just kind of smooth it out and then go black and white with it. But I love that thing of like kind of smoothing out that color.
Yeah, and, just to have put something in there.
Put something in there. Yeah. That's a really cool technique. So the other question we had coming in from Twitter was about, it was from Graphics by AG, and asking Christopher Dave Cross, is there any way to get better edges to the trees, so using channels? So they're selecting channels like jaggedy trees, like here, let me pull it up here, like these jaggedy trees here, and then basically selecting it, trying to get a better selection around those jaggedy trees so they can do some kind of like sky replacement or doing some kind of like replacement, altering of the sky. So basically, any tips for doing that when you've got these trees? Sure.
So again, you're going to probably see a recurring theme here, because people are expecting that I'm going to have some
magic sauce,
super secret trick, and what I found instead was this happens all the time. So what ways can we try and solve it? Because when you look, for example, at this tree, I mean, there's like just so much little detail in there. My expectation is it's not going to probably look very good, because no matter how good you are at channel-based selections, things like that, there's still going to be a time where it's just not going to work. So I'll do the sort of quick version of the channel-based selection, is to take a channel like the blue channel, and I think what he was saying he was doing was using levels. Well, I'm going to suggest that you got to be careful, because if you go too far, that's what kind of starts mucking things up a little bit. So I want to go just as best I can to get a good start, and then one method that I like, which is a cool kind of a trick, is I do select all, copy, paste. So I'm copying and pasting right on top of itself, which initially has no kind of effect. But if you go under edit to fade, one of the options is fade is blend mode. So you can change to like overlay. You see how everything just got darker? So it's like painting the photograph on top of itself in overlay mode. And that will often just do a better job, I think, of getting that detail. And you can actually do it more than once. You have to, oddly enough, start the whole thing again of copy and paste and then fade. But again, a little bit more overlay. But I'll just cut to the chase here and say, let's just pretend that all the rest of this is selected. So I'll take my paintbrush and make sure that's in overlay mode. And just get, whoops, wrong color though, Dave. So, can I cut to the chase? I'm not doing a great job.
Yeah,
It wasn't
not
overlay
exact,
mode. Whoops.
but
Sorry, I said overlay mode, but apparently Photoshop is not voice activated, so you have to actually click on overlay mode. You can't just say it out loud. And then, okay, so I load that as a selection. So here's finally the part of, okay, now I go to the sky, and what I do is I make sure the sky is way too saturated.
Okay.
So everyone's like, make sure your sky matches. My philosophy is no. Find a sky that doesn't match that because it's way too saturated. So you go copy,
it's going to show you where your problems are.
come back into here, and then choose paste into. Just have to make our sky a little bit bigger, but that's okay because it's just a sky. And you can see if we look at these, here's those things he's talking about. But the trick is, because I am so saturated, now all I do is lower the opacity a little bit. And look at how much better the edges get just by doing that.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So it still looks realistic because the final sky matches the photo. So I have literally a folder of skies where I go in and I almost
So you just boosted
bump
them.
up the saturation because I know that bringing it in and then lowering the opacity is just that last little step to fool your eyes into not looking, because photographers will look right there. Like they know if there's going to be a problem area, it's going to be here. So that's where they're going to look. So if you can
and if you
do
look
that
at it
and go,
before and
she
after,
looks
I mean,
pretty
that's
good.
like,
I mean,
crazy.
I've done photos of, I have one from Venice where there was, every house had little tiny antennas on them. I'm like, that would have taken me days to select around those, but instead I used exactly the same method, and all those little antennas now showed, antennae,
Right.
I would say, whatever the plural of antenna, they all showed because just that opacity change let things show through.
Right, so that's using a selection, but then also using, basically, like, the opacity is you're kind of like blending.
Right, exactly.
You're basically masking
Yeah,
in that.
I mean, you could potentially, depending on the sky, you could also, on top of that, maybe do a blend mode, but I found just that alone is usually enough, as long as you're starting with the sky that's too saturated, deliberately, for that reason.
Yeah, well, awesome tip.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we got to take a break here in a second, but I think we got a couple questions coming in.
There was a question about the pen tool, which I can
Yeah.
probably
So let's
address.
see, where were we? Oh, yes. Todd is asking you, in which situations do you still use the pen tool?
So I have changed completely. Years ago, I was a pen tool maniac and used it for everything. But with the advent, especially of things like select subject and the object selection tool, it's given me such good results that I don't really use the pen tool for making selections. So to answer the question, I use the pen tool when I want to draw some shape that I'm using as like maybe a design element. But it's been a long time since I've actually taken my pen tool and outlined around the outside of something. And part of the reason is I believe there's a common myth that people think that you get a more accurate, sharper mask if you use the pen tool. And that's just not true, because ultimately you still turn your selection into a pixel-based mask. So really what the pen tool does is gives you more control perhaps of having anchor points, but when you have automatic tools like we do that do such a great job, it's like, why would you want to take, unless you
'cause
get
the
paid by
automatic
the
tools-
hour, then use the pen tool, because it'll take you a lot longer. But I find the automatic tool is just such a good job that the need for the pen tool has really diminished. Unless you're, again, a pro at the pen tool and you can do it really fast, I always start with the automatic ones first, because I generally get such a great start that it saves me a ton of time.
Well, yeah, and that's something. It's probably it's hard to break those old habits.
Yeah.
Especially, it's kind of like in photography. You're not a photographer until you use manual mode, or
Right.
if you're not using manual mode,
Yeah.
you're not a photographer. But it's like, well, wait a minute. If there's automatic modes, like there is automatic modes that you're talking about in Photoshop, why not start with that? Because it's going to save you time. But
Right.
like you said, so really it comes down to the reason you would use the pen tool is you're getting paid by the hour.
Pretty much.
Okay, sounds good. Well, when we come back, we're gonna answer. We got tons of questions coming in, but if you got any questions, just ask them. We're gonna be answering anything to do with Photoshop. Dave's here to answer all your questions about Photoshop, as long as it's not 3D. There you go.
Howdy folks, Moose Peterson here, and welcome to Nellis Air Force Base for Aviation Nation Air Show. This is just an amazing place to sit there and take photographs. So we're taking you there on a new class. Now we're going to talk about everything from photographing jets, doing formations, working with gear, dealing with the heat, dealing with taking care of yourself, but more importantly, how to arrange the elements in that viewfinder. So when you've got the jets, you've got the helicopters, you have the great sneak attacks, you have the smoke, you have all those elements that make an air show exciting, fun, are just all gonna be crammed in this class and a lot more. So yeah, I'm not gonna talk about just, a lens and pointing it somewhere. We're gonna talk about very specific things like you're sitting there shooting aperture priority to get the jet, but then you want to get that quick shot of the helo, you need to slow down the shutter speed. How do you do that? Grab your big lens, clean the sensor, charge the batteries, put on the sunblock, don your sling bag. This is all going to happen for you at kelby1.com.
This segment of The Grid is brought to you by Canon.
All right, we're back, and we saw an ad there for Moose Peterson's new class is coming out, or is out, and people are loving it. It's about how to shoot air shows, and air show season's coming back.
Yeah.
They're advertising a lot here around Tampa. We got 2 shows coming up in the next month, so air show season is back. So if you're into air shows, it's a cool class to check out. But Dave, before we get into the next tip, I got a question for you. Is how do you mask out a Blammo bottle? I just saw a comment that somebody was saying, "Oh man, that's like an old Photoshop user episode." So,
Hadn't thought about that in a long
oh
time.
man, I remember back in the day we used to like have all those little hidden things, had the Blammo bottle, and what was the other one?
Well, there was always some comment about Scott raising miniature Shetland ponies
Yeah,
that always
Shetland
seemed to
ponies. Yes, that's where Scott is right now, right? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
He out in San Diego, he has a Shetland pony farm, miniature Shetland pony farm, and he always
some people
lines
are
up.
like, "What are you
he
talking
lines up
about?"
his seminars based on his little
visit his
Shetland
ponies.
pony empire that he has. So
Nice.
it's pretty good. And then, the other day, I don't know, you remember Snowy with the little episode?
still
Yes,
have.
Snowy is still here in the office. He comes out at Christmas time, and he has his tree, and he's got, all that stuff. So he was on Juan's desk the other day. So, but yeah,
Nice.
so we got a bunch of questions coming in about Photoshop. I got one here that Pat asked. Select object. He's saying simple definition, please. So they just want a simple definition of what is select object.
Okay, so the select subject tool looks at your photograph and says, I see a subject. But for example, what if there were 5 subjects? It would select them all because as far as it's concerned, it doesn't know which one you want. So the object selection tool is almost like you're making a selection to say, look inside this selection to select a subject. So therefore, if you had, say, a photo with 5 boxes, you could draw a rectangle with this tool around box number 3, and that would be the only one that it would look at to make a selection. So it just narrows down
So yeah,
the
it's like
focus of the select subject
it's
tool.
like targeting the
Right,
select
exactly.
subject tool.
Yeah.
Yes. So there you go. Targeting of the
useful.
select subject. We got a bunch of other questions coming in. Here's another one. And this is more of a comment, but just kind of your thoughts on it. Joseph's asking. So usually you need multiple techniques to get a proper selection. Is that what you would say?
Well, one of the things that I talked about in my class right at the beginning is I have a favorite expression that says you should always think about ending up with a great selection. So a lot of times we'll just say, I need to select this object, and then they try it with one tool and it doesn't work. So I always go in thinking, I know it's going to probably take more than one tool. And now, luckily, one of those tools is often select subject, which means it does a really good job to start, and then I'm just fine-tuning. And then there's the odd time like the tree, or someone else asks a question about things like lace, where you have to do a channel-based selection in multiple steps. But I still always try, well, I should say most of the time I'm going to try an automatic selection tool first, because even when it doesn't work perfectly, it's usually way better than I would do.
Right.
And it takes less time. So
and then you
it's a
can
good
just,
start.
And then you can just build on top
Exactly,
of that.
yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that you talked about even with your class and all the classes that you do, is it's something where it is something that somebody starting out can do, but it's something that somebody who's more advanced is going to learn things that they could then build on themselves. Because that's
Right.
the beauty of Photoshop, is it's a program that never has an end.
Yeah.
There's never an end to it. You can always like learn new techniques, learn new tricks that you could then go farther and
Yep.
get more advanced with it.
Yeah, it's one of the things I love about, especially love about teaching different groups of people, is that someone will come up, but just when I thought I'd had any possible question, someone say, I use Photoshop to design material for my fashion line, and I'm doing, and they're describing this really interesting thing that they're doing with Photoshop, but ultimately it's still, they're using layers, and they're masking, and they're using, they might do some more specialized things like patterns, but overall the core functions that people do in Photoshop typically are the same, no matter what the end result of what you're doing with it. So that's one of the beauties of it, for
Yep.
sure.
Yeah, definitely. And so Rose is asking a question. She's asking about the clone stamp tool. She says, I really hate the clone stamp tool in Photoshop. And hate's a strong,
It is a strong word, yeah.
Right? So it always seems to duplicate my cloning. Please explain how to use it. So
Okay.
how would you explain?
Well, so here's what I would say about that. Just like when we talked about how in the world of selections, there's like select subject means, for example, I hardly use the magic wand anymore because it's not necessary. For me, the clone stamp tool has dropped way down in usefulness for retouching after things like the healing brush, the spot healing brush, and the patch tool, because they tend to do a better job. So the clone stamp tool simply is really like you're copying and pasting with a paintbrush. So you're saying, I want to take these pixels and paint them over there. So what I tend to suggest doing is make a new layer,
Okay.
and then when you're going to use the clone stamp tool, we're going to make sure that we're saying either all layers or current and below, which means the result of this tool is going to be on the blank layer. That way, if you really mess up, you haven't actually altered your photograph.
Okay.
So, not that it would make any sense in this case, but I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key and click right on her glasses. And now wherever I move, you can already see a preview. It's going to say, you've copied this. Where do you want to, in effect, paste it? So as soon as I start painting, now I've established that's where I'm painting, in effect, or pasting. So it's basically, so it is really, its function is to copy the pixels.
Yeah.
That's what it does. I think the
Hence
confusion.
the name clone.
Right.
Stamp.
The confusion sometimes, if someone wants to do something like, I want to get rid of this camera, quote unquote, you'd have to, the onus would be on you to pick the right spot to say, well, I need to match this shade of blue, so I'll click on here and hope that when I paint, I've got the same shade of blue, which luckily enough it seemed to. But again,
Well,
I
when
would,
you get near the
I would
fingers
probably,
there,
yeah, I'd probably go directly to a tool like the spot healing brush, because it's really just, I just need a bigger brush here. You just sort of paint over and say, you know, cover that up, and it's going to do all the work for you.
Or at least get you close.
Get closer now. There's more work to be done. In this case, I'd probably use
Yeah,
content-aware
multiple hands.
fill because it's even better. But so the bottom line is the clone stamp tool has its role, but to me, it's more of a, I would try and do as much as I could with the patch tool and the content-aware fill, and if necessary, use the clone stamp to kind of break up any obvious patterns or something like that.
Yeah, so there you go. So it's just maybe the clone stamp tool, if you hate it, maybe learn one of those other tools. You know,
Yeah.
so
and
maybe using one
and
of the
one of
other
the things I
ones.
always say is that just because you see a tutorial somewhere that says use the clone stamp tool, that may not be the best tool for the job or for you.
Yeah.
And if you know that there are other ones, especially ones that are a little more automatic, like the spot healing brush, I didn't have to do anything except paint. Content-aware fill, you can just make a selection and then you see a preview, and it helps you determine from which area do you want to generate pixels, and it just does it for you.
Yep. Yeah, and now with that content-aware feature, I mean,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
now there's times, like you said, it doesn't work, but
Right.
there's times where you can just paint over it and boom, it's gone. So
And even the time it doesn't work, to me, it still gets you
90%
really close.
there, and then all you got to do is
yeah.
finesse it. Yeah, there you go. So Marianne is asking tips for accurate masking for a one-handed person, excluding graphics tag and stick key. So any new ideas, please? A person who uses one hand and wants to learn more.
Okay.
I'm left-handed.
Well-
so if you're one-handed,
The good news about some of the key selection tools, so let's imagine, for example, in this case, I wanted to select her, so I try select subject. And I'm going to guess and say it's probably going to do a pretty darn good job, which it did. But let's pretend that it missed a bit. So now I need to use my lasso tool. Well, in order to do that, I would usually say to someone, hold down the shift key because you need to add to the selection. Well, of course,
Right.
she can't. But the good news is if you look up in the options bar, there's the equivalent of those keys up here. So the first one is add to the selection, which is like holding down the shift key. So now when I do it, I'm still only using one hand, and now if I need to take away from the selection, I go up and find the one that is the equivalent of the Alt key or Option key. So with most selection tools, there are those type of options which are the equivalent of
Right.
those important keys. And really those are the only main keys that we typically hold down when we're fine-tuning a selection is one of those two, shift to
Yeah,
add,
it's just
Option
a-
Alt to
yeah,
take away,
exactly. It's a
and now
plus
you
and a
just
minus.
you just
Yeah.
do it. And you just have to remember, of course, that the difference is once you click on one of these, it'll stay clicked until you go back and change it.
Okay, cool. All right, we're gonna take a break here in a second, but let's get one more question before we get to the break. So the question is, Scott's asking, Dave and Erik, starting today, Photoshop in Windows 10 is not giving us, there was a problem with generator error and will not open to export files. Not asking for technical support, just wondering if it's a well-known issue.
I mean,
No.
it's not one, I mean, it may well be in the sense that if you search for it, you might find other people saying it, but it's not one that I
That's-
hear that people say all the time, oh yeah, this is an issue
And that,
that's...
you just said a good tip for things like this is go to google.com, type in the error that you're getting, And if it is common, I guarantee you.
Oh, yeah, there'll be a discussion about
And
it.
you know what you're going to hit first is going to be Adobe Forum
Yep.
or Adobe Technical Forum.
Right,
Where it's
exactly.
going to have all that detail.
Other users who've had the same
Same thing
problem.
happens, Microsoft, Apple.
Yep.
If it's a very common, especially because you're getting an error code or an error response, copy that exact error and then search for it. And that's usually where I would start. So definitely there. Hey, we got a few other questions to answer. If you guys have any other questions, just ask them, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. We'll be also giving away these prizes, so if you want to win the prizes, just comment in the comments below. See you guys in just a minute.
Hi there, Kelby One members. Corey Barker here with Master FX Training, and now, this time around, we are going to be talking about 3D compositing. Now, we've talked about 3D, we've talked about compositing. Now we're going to talk about 3D compositing. And what we're going to be doing is creating custom 3D scenes from a variety of 2D sources. Now, one of the key factors here is that we're going to be using the principles of photography. We're going to be building a composite, we're going to be using depth of field. We're going to be using lighting effects, backlighting effects. These are all things that you would construct when you're doing a photo shoot. We're going to do it all inside of Photoshop. I hope you'll join me in checking out these newest courses on kelby1.com.
Hi, I'm Ibadi NX Perella, and I'm here in downtown Los Angeles. Have you ever been out on a busy street scene and you get out there and there's so much going on, you just don't know where to start? You get really frustrated, you make some snapshots, but they're so lackluster. Well, what I'm going to teach you are the very secrets that I use all the time to make great photographs from some of the most ordinary scenes imaginable. You'll learn in this class how, by just carefully observing and watching things sort of play out in front of you, visual miracles can happen just as a result of you just staying in place and seeing life play out in front of you. And this class is for more than just people interested in street photography. This is a way of how you see the world. So come check out my class and learn something brand new.
This segment of The Grid is brought to you by Platyball, the world's most compact tripod base.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of The Grid by subscribing to Apple's podcast app or iTunes. It's free, and we even have a special audio-only version too. So sign up today.
All right, we are back talking Photoshop and checking in with Scott with the Shetland ponies too. So we got a few more questions here coming in.
I'm a little hoarse.
Yeah, right there. That's what used to happen all the time, right? We were just actually reminiscing. We used to have those things where we would have there's one episode we had one of our interns in his head, and we were like,
Juggling.
You guys were like
He's
juggling his head and then throwing it back and forth, and then he like threw it and it exploded and stuff like
it's
that.
like the good thing we didn't actually talk about Photoshop very much at all.
Yeah,
Well, it did a little
no,
bit, but
it did. It was 18% Photoshop, probably 80% silliness, and then 2% something else.
yeah, whatever was left over.
Whatever was left over. There you go. So there's a couple of other questions. So Chris is asking an interesting one about posting to Instagram. So it posts to Instagram a lot. Is there an easy way to export from either Lightroom or Photoshop so that borders are added to their photos so it'd be square? So like kind of like a export template where you could take a photo that say is 16 by 9 or 4 by 3 and then just conform it to a 1 by 1 with adding borders.
So one of the things that has always struck me as being really odd, and as great as Photoshop is, a lot of things, cropping is surprisingly difficult.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when you look at the crop tool, there's all these settings, and I realized some time ago there are a lot of cases like that where I want to crop to a square for something like Instagram. So what I suggest doing is instead of messing around with the crop tool, you just create a new document, and whatever size you decide is appropriate for something like Instagram, I'm just going to say 1,000 pixels square. Create that. And then probably the easiest way, I'm trying to think of a simple way to make a template that would include
Could you make
a
an
border.
action?
You could, but this to me is almost easier, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to fill this and then do a stroke layer style of white. And of course, whatever size you want it to be. And then we're going to take the fill opacity down all the way to 0, so you won't see it for a moment. But then, from now on, anytime you want to post a photograph to Instagram, you're just going to drag that photograph in. Make sure it's down here, and then it's just a matter of free transform. And now you decide what square of this photograph. So it's almost like, in a sense, you're still cropping, but you already have this set up, and then it's just save as. You've got your photo. That wasn't a great example, of course, because it's on white. But so that idea of creating a document where you have the necessary elements and then just drag in a photograph, to me, by the time you say I'm going to make an action that crops, and I mean you can do it, but this making a document almost like your template to be a cropping document, to me often is just easier. Like if I'm going to do an 8x10, I have a document on my main printing machine that's just 8x10, and it already has everything ready to go. So I literally just drag the photo in, and it already has like everything I need.
So you're just creating a template that you're dropping the photo into and then resizing it.
Yeah, and as an added bonus, Photoshop doesn't actually have a built-in way to save as a template. Like, there's no command called save as template, but in kind of a weird twist, if you save a PSD file and then find that PSD file on your desktop, wherever you save it, you just add the letter T, PSD T, now it becomes a template. So every time you open it, it automatically creates an untitled copy. So you don't have to worry about saving over the top or anything. So, a little bonus tip.
So Gary's asking, and you're using a Wacom tablet. So I know Wacom tablets is a gold standard for editing, but what's Dave's thoughts on Microsoft Surface tablets and Photoshop?
I mean, I know a lot of people that use them. For me, that was never an option when I first started. It was always, well, a Wacom tablet was an add-on to whatever device you're using, so it just became another input device. So for me, I've always used a Wacom tablet of one kind or another, so it's natural to me. Any type of device where, like the Cintiq or something, or any tablet or Surface or anything where you're kind of working right on the screen, definitely has its advantages. I'd say if you're not used to this concept of that your tablet's off to the side and you're looking at the screen, so you're not actually looking right where your pen is. For some people, that takes a bit of time getting used to. But once you get used to it, for me, it's just, I don't even think about it anymore. I just, So I think it's like anything. There are probably lots of people out there that use Surface tablets and say, wow, this is the greatest thing I've ever used, because it's for them.
Yeah,
it works
and I
really
think
well.
you're used to. I mean, I know for me, the Surface or the iPad and stuff like that, it just feels better, But that's also me. I wasn't a master at a tablet,
Right.
So I think if you're a master at a tablet and stuff like that, then that's something. I think it is easier probably to use a pen, because we're so used to drawing on.
Right,
something.
drawing directly on, for sure.
So it's like your mind doesn't, because that was always the thing with a tablet, is you're having to translate this motion to a screen that's up here.
It definitely takes some time.
Kind of like, my daughter with like a mouse, like she's so used to tablets that a mouse is like a foreign concept,
exactly.
and it's like, wait a minute, why am I moving something down here? Why can't I just touch the screen and it just work? So,
although I will say, funnily enough, even though I use my Wacom tablet all the time, I use my iPad for lots of other things. That just the other day, without even thinking, I reached over to my laptop and I was wondering why pinching the screen wasn't working. I'm like, oh, that's because this is not a touch screen.
Yep. There you go. There you go. So we have some giveaways to give away. So we got giveaways. We got the T-shirts and we got the Platyball and the book. So the T-shirts, if you guys entered, we have 2 winners for the T-shirts. So we have Hugh Williams. You've won one of these sweet, Flattened T-shirts. Flatten's Photoshop's F-word T-shirts from Dave Cross. So Hugh, you won that, and then Susan also has won a T-shirt, and then the Platypod, we got the Platypod, and Charles Ralphine has won the Platypod. So Charles, congratulations! You just won the coolest tripod alternative in the world that we've talked about all the time. And then Lyle's won the book from Photoshop for Lightroom users from Scott Kelby. So
Nice.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Dave, I really appreciate you coming on the show and showing this stuff.
Always fun.
I mean, it's really fun. I mean, it was kind of like we were back at the Photoshop user days. You know, we were doing that stuff. So, really cool stuff. Where can they check out more about you? So,
well, there's a couple things. If you're a podcast kind of a person, I have a podcast called Talking Shop. It's got a little more of the apostrophe things. Talking Shop, like it's in Photoshop.
Got it.
Available on all places you can find podcasts. And my main training site is learningphotoshop.cc, where I have all my tutorials and courses and all that good stuff.
Plus, you can check out all your classes on
kelby1.com.
For sure.
I've got quite a few of those.
And like you said, we got that one you just filmed. Well, that'll be coming up in a couple weeks.
Sure.
So we'll have that out for you in a couple weeks if you're a Kelby One member.
Awesome.
Check that out at kelby1.com.
For sure.
Well, thanks for joining us. And
pleasure.
Next week, I think Scott will be back. Yes, I don't think he has any Shetland pony events coming up. So
I was going to say, nay, I don't think he will be, but that would be a bad.
Yes, but I don't think he'll. I think he'll be back, but we'll see.
Whether you have a job or not is another question after that whole Shetland pony thing. I know that was not his favorite thing.
Well, I mean, he was world renowned in it for a while.
He was, thanks to us.
Yeah, thanks to us. There you go. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys next week here on the grid, and check you later.
Bye.